It feels like a little while since we've done a proper video, so welcome back everybody. In a magnificent return to form, today we're going to talk about a very niche historical document. A little reminder, we were previously talking about the Scott Report, which was the plan for the post-war countryside, and it said we wanted an efficient agricultural sector which would provide cheap food for urban workers, and we would maintain a beautiful countryside for them to enjoy. This meant preserving rural communities, and we looked at a vintage film that sets out a vision for modern Britain, which was a very tolerant and understanding place where town and country came together and they shared each other's best qualities, and everyone lives happily ever after. What's really interesting about this is that it is some pretty utopian thinking, that society should be more or less equal and people from different cultures and backgrounds should mix together and get along. And across the country, people of influence really seem to want to make life fairer for people. I would like to show you this, which is a collection of minutes from the wartime meetings of the Leicestershire Chamber of Commerce. So it's the thoughts of a group of business people from Leicestershire, which is a county in the English Midlands. There is a parallel here to the present day, as people are currently very concerned that capitalists are taking great interest in the land. There was some hostility towards Bill Gates at the protest about inheritance tax, which we will investigate further in the next couple of weeks. But these guys from the Second World War seem alright, so maybe we don't have to be scared. Their Industrial Reconstruction Committee talks to Alderman Astill, who I think I might have mentioned before. I think he's probably the same Astill who chaired Leicestershire's War Agricultural Executive Committee for most of the war. He notes that the Associated British Chambers of Commerce and the London Chamber of Commerce stressed the nation's need of a prosperous and efficient agricultural industry as the basis of general prosperity, and of the maintenance of a correct balance between industry and agriculture as an essential to social stability and to the health and happiness of the community. Agriculture must not be allowed to decline, and agricultural land should be scheduled for farming alone. This is very different from the sort of thing we hear today. As I have said a million times, the post-war settlement was not for farmers, it was for townspeople. And these people are industrialists, they are townies, and they want an efficient agriculture to provide food and to maintain a beautiful landscape. And they want that, even if it goes against market forces. This is Britain's great socialist moment. The Chamber agrees a prosperous and efficient agricultural industry is necessary for the well-being of the nation, both rural and urban, and they believe in the cheap food policy for the benefit of the people. Too expensive a food policy would constitute a grave danger to the community at large. This is very significant because these are business people, and before the war, Britain's food policy had been to import whatever we could at the world dump price. This was a way to keep industrial wages low, and therefore the stuff we produced cheap and more competitive when we sent it abroad. That was very good for industrialisation, but it meant that much of the British population was malnourished and life expectancy was pretty rubbish. Continuing to grow our own food after the war would probably make food more expensive, which would drive up wages and probably damage our ability to export, and the Chamber do mention this. We feel that an agricultural policy which results in a materially higher cost of living, whether shown in prices of food or paid for by subsidies, is a real danger to our vital need to export. Astill objects to this and says the cost could be mitigated through improved organisation of distribution and that reducing imports would improve our balance of payments as money would stay in Britain. I actually think this is a bit of a weak defence from Astill, as there were some very real economic disadvantages to the cheap food policy, but that's the point. In the end, these business people were prepared to back a socialist settlement for the countryside. They conclude, the Chamber therefore urges that competition for cheapness should not influence the government in formulating a sound agricultural policy for this country. This almost suggests they consider agriculture to be more important than business. And then it gets really fun. They turn to the findings of the Scott Report and paint a picture of a modern agrarian Leicestershire. How should the county be rebuilt after the war? They quote the Scott Report, saying there is an innate love of nature deeply implanted in the heart of man, and that the drift from the land has been occasioned by economic inequalities between town and country, and not because people actually want to live in towns. And the committee were concerned manufacturing was starting to occur outside the city and towns. In the opinion of the subcommittee, the spread of industry from towns to villages has gone further than is good for agricultural welfare or for the amenities of the countryside. The subcommittee considers villages to be suited to small-scale industry, while large-scale manufacturing should be retained in towns. And they complain factories have been built in the countryside. Development of housing will be necessary in their neighbourhood at the expense of what is now excellently farmed land. Instead, the subcommittee wants to see the resuscitation of the village smith and the village wheelwright shop, as it believes that with an increase in mechanised farming, the use of the smithy could be developed for work on motors and for the production of hand-forged implements. They want a modern, traditional, rural community, and this perhaps socially conservative idea, tied to socialist economic policies and a belief in technological advancement characteristic of the modern age, is seen in government films of the time. This one shows a traditional village blacksmith who is safe in his job because he has become a welder.
But basically, of course, we're agricultural. The town's grown out of the soil, and most of the jobs we do have some connection with it. Bill Garson's forge, for instance. There's a lot of electric welding done there now, and most of it is repair and maintenance of the new mechanical implements used on the land. Like most towns in Britain, you'll find the old and the picturesque that still serves a use side by side with the new.
But alongside the preservation of rural communities, they want the countryside to be kept beautiful and to be as accessible as possible for townspeople who might wish to partake in it, whether they want to live there or just visit on holiday. Steps should be taken to check ribbon development, which is uneconomic, unsightly and usually detrimental to agriculture. Also check the erection in rural areas of urban houses. They want the natural world to be accessible to townspeople, and they want country people to be educated and enlightened. The subcommittee recommends more attention being paid to nature study, to crafts and to vocational training, with agriculture as the focal point. And if townspeople should prefer that type of life, they should have it. There will always be town dwellers who want to live in the country, for whom housing must be found there. The questions being asked by this committee are very important because they are the same questions that are being asked today. They asked if we should be importing crap food as cheaply as possible from wherever in the world will sell it to us. And they say no to the metaphorical chlorinated chicken. They were asking if we should be building townhouses on the edges of villages. And they said no, because they're ugly and inefficient. These people were asking if farmers deserved protections and respect. And their conclusions were very different to the politics of envy that has been sparked by the decisions of the current government. There is a great deal of friction today, which I think is a shame. And I feel that in many ways, because the decisions made in the Second World War are now being undone, we are returning back to a situation much more like the 1930s, which was a scenario these people thought wasn't fit for the modern age. We are seeing the Americanization of the British diet, as both the previous government and this one seem keen to import rubbish for us to eat. They've done trade deals that will open us up to the Australian dump price, and the direct subsidies for food production have been removed. It does feel like the countryside is being willfully thrust back into a depression, and farmers are now at the centre of a culture war which is just not necessary. History repeats itself. After the First World War, we had the Great Betrayal when support for farming was removed and farmers were villainised for having profited from the Great War. The consequence of that friction between rural and urban between the wars was urban people having a terrible diet and the countryside being swamped by ugly, inefficient developments. The post-war settlement happened for a reason. The Socialist Labour Party believed in it, but so did business people. We must remind ourselves why these decisions were made. As I've said before, this utopian vision of a tolerant society where town and country mix doesn't really work, partly because mechanisation continues to erode the rural population, but also because townies just don't mix with country people when they move out into villages. Rather than smooth over the rural-urban cultural divide, the effect of these policies was just to export urban culture and urban people into villages, where they quickly became the majority.
What about the village? Now, you were saying in the war...
Oh, it's twice as big today, but we haven't got the villagers in. We've got what we call the foreigner.
Yeah.
The town is coming, and he tries to run it to his type of life, and no, he's not. He's got to blend into the countryside type of life.
That chap definitely feels some resentment towards this, and although townspeople don't take the traditional community role that had been fulfilled by the village blacksmith or butcher, the alternative would have been desolation.
This village, in my opinion, would have died after the war if it hadn't have been for new development. There wouldn't have been the number of people to support the church, the village hall, the public house. The church, I feel, is probably having more interest taken in it with the coming of the city dwellers.
I think what he says here is very true. There is social friction between farmers and townspeople within villages, but if there were only country people in the countryside, my village would only have 2 families in it. There's us and one other farmer in the village. And one thing that I think is very important is that the style of thinking after the Second World War allowed villages to retain their architectural character, even if more houses were built in them.
And when I say new development, I'm not talking about tremendous housing estates. I'm talking about infilling in the villages. Such places as orchards, large gardens, derelict farm buildings have all been used for conversion to domestic purposes.
Where villages were a collection of small farmyards and orchards and paddocks, those sites have been developed, but that means that with more houses, the village hasn't really expanded geographically. They've been infilled, which, if done tastefully, has allowed them to retain their traditional character and charm, even if country people are now outsiders in their own environment. I hope you found that interesting. I do think it's very important to understand why people thought what they did in the Second World War, because the questions they're asking are exactly the same as what we're asking today, but I feel people back then thought about things a lot harder and were much more tolerant. They weren't trying to spark a politics of envy, as seems to happen at the moment. They were genuinely trying to bring people together. And informed by the experience of war, they really meant it. These weren't out-of-touch politicians. This came from the heart. If you want to discuss this stuff, there's a link to the Discord in the description, and on the homepage of this channel there should be a playlist of all of the historical episodes if you want to watch them in order so they make sense. We have about finished the Second World War now. I think over the next couple of weeks we're going to have a look at current events and also some of the conspiracy theories that have been cropping up around farming at the moment. Thank you for watching. I shall see you again.
On market days, there's also the stall market. This is really an extension of the shopping centre and caters for the extra people who come in from the farms and villages. Among them nowadays you'll find strange faces. City people who took refuge with us from the bombed out areas. Some of them have settled down to live here. And the stall market isn't as busy as it was before the war. That's because of the rationing. Yes, the people of a country town are rationed too, even though they're growing the food.